I worked for a member of Congress in the past lives. You'd workshop every word in your tweet. Elon Musk tweets 600 times a day. Your one tweet does not matter. It's okay to innovate. It's okay to test. It's okay to just say, we don't have a perfect metric. We might not be able to track this exactly, but let's just see how it goes.
The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn. Dunn is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people and organisations who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in your world in 2026, then hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members. If you want to join those wonderful supporters of our podcast and financially support our show so we can continue to produce great episodes every week, then we encourage you to click on the link in the show notes and subscribe to join the Patreon community of Socially Democratic. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. For over a century, Maurice Blackburn has stood up for fairness, championing the rights of everyday Australians and shaping landmark legal reforms. Today, they're harnessing new technologies to make justice more accessible, more efficient, and more responsive to the needs of modern Australia. All right, let's get on with today's episode. We are taping this one on a Thursday morning on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. And today's episode is going to be discussing organising. And so for all of our organisers out there, this is the episode for you because there was a report that has just been published examining the challenges that field organising and digital campaigns have faced at recent US presidential elections for the Democrats. And the report seeks to explore how to transform organising to persuade and mobilise voters, build lasting infrastructure and win elections. And on today's episode, we're joined by two of the authors of this important report to discuss this and what the implications will have for campaigns, not just in the United States, but also here in Australia, because we are at a bit of a crossroads in terms of how we continue to modernise the way that we campaign. And if I can introduce our first of our two guests, she is an American political campaigner and researcher. In 2012, she got her start in national politics as a field organiser for Obama for America, and in 2020 was the national organising director for Democratic presidential primary candidate Mayor Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Little known fact, I've been to South Bend, Indiana on 5 separate occasions. Be interested to work out if our guest can work out why that would be the case. While I'd be visiting a small regional city in northwestern Indiana. She was the co-founder of Relentless, a campaign agency that focuses on relational organising, and today is an advisor to over 40 campaigns across the country specialising in relational organising. She's been described to me as an evangelist for organising, and that's the kind of person I like. Greta Carnes, welcome to Socially Democratic.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to talk to you.
And our second guest today is, besides being a good friend of mine, he's also an alum of Obama for America. He has since built a reputation as an expert in digital strategy and engagement, and he is now the president and co-founder of Good Influence, an agency that connects nonprofits, advocacy organisations, progressive campaigns and candidates with trusted content creators. And he also hosts a session for the Dunn United States Engagement Mission every September. Josh Cook, welcome to Social Democratic. Hard to believe you've actually never been on the podcast before, given we talk so often.
Yeah, I'm a little offended, but I'm happy to be here now. Thanks for having us.
Better late than never. Greta, why do you think I've been to South Bend, Indiana on 5 separate occasions? And I'll give you a hint. My name is Stephen Paul Patrick Donnelly.
I was going to guess it's because they have the best turkey sandwich in the country. But now I'm going to guess it's because you've gone to Notre Dame games.
Correct. Go Irish. Very good.
It was the first college football game I ever went to was in South Bend. And when they do that prayer at the beginning, I had no idea what that was and was like, how does everybody know what this poem is?
It's the best. I've taken two Protestants. Actually, no, one Protestant and one Greek Orthodox to a Notre Dame game, and they want to convert now. That's how spiritual the experience is.
Touchdown Jesus did it for them.
Yeah.
Not to go down this rabbit hole, but I'm not a Notre Dame fan. I just want to say that. But there's an incredible story about Notre Dame students fighting KKK members on the streets. And that's part of how they got the name the Fighting Irish, right? Is the quarterback literally threw, I believe, like a rock at the sign of the KKK headquarters in the town. There's a great story about it. But anyway, they get a lot of respect on that for me from this
100%.
Jewish kid. Yeah.
100%. Absolutely. I think the priest had said to the football team and any students, let's get off campus, go into town, and let's sort out these Indiana Nazis. To borrow.
So good work by you guys.
Yeah, every now and then we try to do the right thing. We're not perfect. Okay, before this turns into a college football / politics podcast, let's talk about what we wanted to talk about, which was this report that both of you were a part of authoring, titled "The Future of Democratic Organising," following the 2024 presidentials and the defeat of both the top of the ticket candidate, and then obviously it wasn't a great result for the Democrats both in the House and the Senate. To you, Josh, first, why write this report now?
Yeah, it's a great question. First, this report was written by a pretty big cadre of folks who Greta and I were both recruited into by another member, and it actually started like pretty close to right after the election. So like at the very beginning of 2025, this group started meeting. This was pitched to all of us as a 3-month project that we would all come together and do. It ended up, we all contributed different parts and things, but it took a whole year is the short of it. And, as you see in the report, that involved a ton of conversations with folks who touched campaigns at every single level, from the newest organizer to the most senior folks on campaigns, folks who are working outside of the campaigns, really every level of it. And just once you start those conversations, they don't really stop. And so, in a moment where, to your point, we didn't just lose the presidential, we lost pretty much every single one of our core states. The blue wall didn't happen at the presidential level. There was a lot to sort of, I think, everyone wanted to know on every level, from the organizing to the digital tactics to the data side. So the group that was assembled touched all of it. We had folks who live and breathe the data every day, folks like myself who touch the internet in all the ways and digital organizing and think about that 24/7, a lot of organizing folks. It was a weird reunion for lots of different people the first time we got together, where everyone knew everyone from some walk of life or part of a campaign. But it's rare you actually just get everyone in a room like that. So it just took a year. So it's not that we wrote this yesterday and dropped it now, a year plus later. It's that to do the level of due diligence on this, it just takes time. And I think anyone who had a hot take a week later might have also been right. But we wanted to back up those things a little bit more deeply.
It's definitely, when you read the report, to your point, Josh, there is a lot of due diligence. It's not just anecdotal surveying. There's a lot of research has gone into it as well, to back up a lot of the assumptions and reflections in the report, which I really valued. And obviously, Josh, you've got a background in the digital and data space. Greta, what brought you into this work? What interested you to contribute to such an important and meaningful report?
Yeah. Well, my real background story is, I was an organizer for Obama, loved it, knocked doors, made phone calls, and was seen as a great organizer because I knocked a ton of doors and made a ton of phone calls. And it was in Dubuque, Iowa, which used to be a liberal stronghold and now has gone more and more conservative every cycle. And what was such a wake-up call to me was after 2 years on Hillary's campaign, we knocked more doors, we made more phone calls than any campaign in history, and we lost. And I thought, well, surely we're going to have a conversation about what just happened. And as a party, we really didn't. And it was so stark for me watching everybody just continue into the 2018 midterms doing the exact same thing. And so I got really into looking at other kinds of organizing programs. I got really into looking at K-pop organizing and how they organize around mutual aid. I got really into organizing like MLMs and churches. And so I started digging into what actual organizing programs looked like. And through that, kind of devised like if I was a dream organizing director, what I would want to do. And so then I ended up on Pete's campaign with essentially like a blank check of, we know we need to do innovative things to be able to try to win this unwinnable race for this unwinnable candidate. Let's throw a bunch of spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. I thought it was going to be a 2-month race, and then I was going to go jump onto an actual contender. And we got to do so much innovative stuff with actual funding and investment behind it, which was incredible. And so again, after we, narrowly won the Iowa caucus by doing things totally differently, I thought, okay, great. Surely people are going to want to talk about how we took this random guy and elevated him into a top tier presidential candidate. We did persuasion at scale. We had a ton of negative media attention around us and still ended up not having support cave. Like we did so many interesting things. And then 2020 hit and we went back to knocking a ton of doors and making a ton of phone calls by 2022. And so what was so nice about when Amanda came to me and was like, let's do this report, was finally wanting to have this conversation in the party around what isn't working anymore. Why are we still doing things that don't work anymore? And what should we be trying given how different things are than 2008 and 2012? We're in a totally different media environment. People behave totally differently than they did back then. Everything is different. And we have not adapted our organizing program strategy. And so to Josh's point, it's been so nice, having a whole year to want to really dissect this and like figure out, all right, let's talk to everybody. Let's make sure everybody feels like their voice is a part of this, but let's have the, national conversation about what we need to do.
Just building on that, I mean, you've given a bit of context there, certainly through your own journey. And my next question was, how did we get to where we are now, given the successes of 2008 and 2012 in the Obama campaign? It's held up as this sort of model example of electoral organising. How did we get to the stage where we are in 2024 and losing so badly from an organising standpoint?
Yeah, I think we got really good at measuring the wrong things. Like, I think, what was so fascinating about Pete's program was going into Iowa and explaining this like new strategy to volunteers and having volunteers say, yeah, we did this in 2008. We don't know why you guys moved so far away from it. And I wasn't an organizer in 2008. I was too young. And so it was so wild to realize the muscle memory and institutional knowledge our party has lost. I think the reason why we've gotten here is that we have gotten really good at measuring and scaling, knocking doors and making phone calls. And those things worked in 2012. They worked in 2008. When I was an organizer, contact rates on the phones and doors were as high as 50%. Like it was such a different time. People wanted to answer the phone. And when they answered the phone, they wanted to talk about politics. They were so excited to hear from a 19-year-old who was, moved to Iowa and wanted to talk about it. People are not like that anymore. And so we have not adapted because we have built tools that scale doors and phones. We've trained all of our staff to care about how to scale doors and phones. All of our data is about scaling doors and phones. All of the studies that we've built are about the efficacy of doors and phones. We are so narrow-minded in what we do because we've built all of the infrastructure around these two tactics instead of building it around organizing. And even now, like if you look at a lot of campaigns this cycle, they are probably going to emphasize doors and phones, even with this report out and even knowing what just happened in 24.
Josh, you're nodding furiously there.
I mean, well, I guess the thing, another just take, to build on Greta is we've perfected tactics, but tactics aren't a strategy. And so doors and phones were the reason you did them to begin with was because that's how people want to talk to you. And then, there are versions of text messaging that, in 2016, people did really effectively for peer-to-peer, where you're moving that idea to a new platform and you're seeing success. We have really lax text messaging laws in this country, so we have ruined that as a platform for organizing because we spam our best voters into being begged for money for every single person running for office on a daily basis. And so now no one looks at their phone or wants to read their text messages or text you back. No one ever picks up the phone, even for their family members. So like the idea that we're investing in things that people don't want to talk to you on means that the tactic is no longer the right tactic. And so how did we get here? We've built in a cottage industry driven by these things, by metrics. People get their funding based on proving that they were able to do this tactic that isn't working, but we did it as much as anyone's ever done it. That's great. That the incentive structure is wrong. And so, I think if you had someone who landed on Earth tomorrow, you said you need to convince people that this is the right person to vote for, go figure it out. I highly doubt they would come back and say, good news, I called everyone on a telephone, which I found at a thrift store and started using to contact people. Like, that's not going to be the thing if you started campaigning tomorrow for the first time. So, we need to listen to people with new ideas, but we have perfected and used data to a point where it's like we refuse to quickly adapt to new things. It's an innovator's dilemma, right? It's like we got so big and perfect at this that now it's hard to shift.
And if I can jump in there and sort of talk a bit about the Australian experience as well, we have become, when Field was first sort of introduced to the Australian political campaign landscape on the Labor Party side, I can't speak for our opponents, but it was this focus on phones originally, and then switched over to doors, and now it's sort of both. And it took a long time just to convince candidates and politicians and campaign managers that we should go talk to people either on the phones or the doors. That in itself was a mountain that we had to climb. And then now everyone agrees with that. And now there is I won't say an obsession, but there's obviously an overemphasis to the point that people, when you say what Field is or what organising is, they think it's just knocking doors and making calls. So I am wondering, is the experience in the United States, because I feel like here in Australia, people don't know the difference. And I don't want to sound like some sort of academic wanker, but they don't know the difference between organising and mobilising. And to your point, Josh, yeah, you're right. Knocking a door or making a call is a tactic. It's an operating tactic, right? But all of the other bits before that, all the relational work, the building of volunteer capacity, building the glue that binds them all together, and developing leadership and all that other kind of stuff, we just don't take the time to invest in that because we're just like, got to get out there and knock doors. Got to get out there and make calls. One of the some of the research in the report, like 3% pickup rate on the phones, we're not that bad yet in Australia. In the inner city, it's around about 10. In the outer suburbs, it's like 15. In the regional areas, it's like 20, 30 because country people love to answer the phone. Because that's our Darren on the phone. Whereas our doors are a bit better, and we've sort of learned some stuff like knocking during the day, particularly on Mondays and Fridays. Folks are working from home, you're going to hit more people as well. So the doors, but the point is, I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's this sort of lack of understanding between the difference between mobilising and organising. Is that part of the problem? Was that what you discovered in your research as well? I'll go to you, Greta, first.
Yeah, completely, yes. I mean, again, like when I was an organizer for, again, a lauded field program like the Obama 2012 program, I understood that my job was just knocking a ton of doors and making a ton of phone calls, and I was celebrated for it. And I think it's because even between 2008 and 2012, same candidate, same staff, same leadership, something changed, and it's because they figured out scale. And they really invested in that scale. And so I know that came at the expense of me building real relationships with leaders or asking leaders to tap into their networks. Or, I remember so vividly somebody coming into the office and saying, like, either I will make you a lasagna every week for the rest of the election or I'll knock 50 doors. And I picked doors without thinking about it. Like, there was so little room for anybody to do anything that wasn't knocking doors. But also, when you start to knock a ton of doors, I'm sure you're experiencing this. If your goal is to knock as many as possible, your conversations get shorter. You don't spend a ton of time sitting with people and really listening. You don't go back to the same door if it doesn't show up in your weekly universe. We've taken the data of what we want to do and fully bastardized it to this entire other thing. But we look at these huge numbers and we feel relief in these big numbers, even though those numbers aren't winning the election. And what was so interesting about campaigning for Pete was that when the campaign started, we said, we're going to do things differently. We are going to train people how to become organizers in their own community. We're going to have them talk to their friends and family. We're going to tell them they're the most important messenger. And so we trained all of our organizers to essentially be like local coaches. They attended events in the community and they held events in the community. And their entire job was coaching people how to talk to their friends and family. And then when the campaign started doing really well, we brought in senior leaders to help us, like, all right, now take this campaign from a good campaign to a great campaign. And the first thing they asked me to do was say, all right, scrap all that stuff you've been doing, go back to knocking doors. And I was like, why would we do that? This is working. And they were so uncomfortable. People who lead the party were so uncomfortable that they could not point to what my organizers were doing every day. They could not imagine that my organizers were being held accountable for doing work if it wasn't knocking 300 doors every single Tuesday or something. And what was also so hard is, like, there was so little that I could back up with the efficacy of our program past like polling and volunteer numbers, because it's so difficult to measure anything that isn't doors and phones. We didn't have the infrastructure. And so what's hard is that we've become really good at measuring tactics that don't win elections. And we do that because we can measure them, instead of running programs that embrace tactics that might win elections or actually build leadership or actually, train people to become local community volunteers. We don't do any of that anymore.
Somebody said to us something to the effect of campaigning is an art and a science, and we forgot all about the art part of it. We're all science now, and like that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Like these are real things. We had a session where a group had interviewed field organizers around the country, and they were sharing these results with us, and some of the quotes were just like so upsetting. It's just like to think that someone's first organizing experience was effectively like they were working at a call center, just spamming people just the same, as someone trying to like defraud our grandmas or whatever, with these calls. Like that's not campaigning. That's not what the experience is. And to not have any wiggle room to like build those personal connections with the people who are trying to give their time to you at no cost. We're just doing this with an arm tied behind our back, and then, forcing people who are looking to like make a career of this to think that this is all that it is. And then you see them not wanting to come back around. So it's not even just that we're like turning away potential voters with the tactics. We're turning away like a whole generation of people who should be helping build this party and move it forward in the future. It's already hard enough to be an organizer, when you're doing it the best way possible. It's an underfunded space at all times. But, what we heard was, I'm never doing that again. And I don't see a path forward. And I don't want to be getting promoted means I just tell these people to make more calls. Like no one wants to work at a call center, 99% of the time in any field.
And if I can, share my own experiences of campaigning in the States on presidentials. I volunteered in 2008 on the Obama campaign across multiple states. I've talked about this on the podcast before. It was the five of us hired a minivan, drove across America. It was called Aussies for Obama, a road trip you can believe in. It was a lot of fun. And in amongst all of the fun and the beers, I learned a lot of things. And then I volunteered for Hillary in 2016 and then for Harris in 2024 in Michigan. And just the experience in 2008 compared to 2016 and 2024 is stark. In 2008, I never met the organizer. At any of the places field offices we went into, I always met a volunteer team leader. And they had a one-on-one with me. And they asked me about what brought me to this campaign, which is obviously they're incredibly curious, but they would have asked that of anyone, right? And what resources have I got, and what am I committed to, and what time can I give? And so there was relational work there, and whatnot. And I got training before I went out and knocked doors or made calls. And there was just a lot of relational work that happened in that. And in 2016 and in 2024, I met the field organizer. I didn't get a lot of training. I got a bit of here's how you use van, and I just got sent out on my, on my own and to just go knock doors. And so there was no debrief, and it did feel far more transactional than what it was in 2008. And I'm worried that certainly in the Australian context, that's where we're heading as well, because we're falling into that same trap. Greta, you talked a bit about metrics before, and I kind of want to go there now, but I want to also bring in the conversation about digital organising, and then we'll come into that relational stuff a bit later on. So, Josh, can we talk about, because the report does speak about how we need to combine work that is happening online to work that's happening offline. Talk to us about the role of digital organising, how that plays in a broader electoral campaign. What's that supposed to look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's the good and the bad about anything digital is it touches a bit of everything, right? It touches your fundraising, your persuasion, your field, So, there are things that I think there was a lot of innovation last cycle that, when you lose, all the good ideas get washed away along with all the things that were bad. So there was, I think, a lot of good done at a lot of levels. And we're not here just to like throw shade at, everything. Like a lot of people did a lot of good work on the, what it should be, I think is an ever evolving question in my mind, though, where I think like there's so much potential. When Greta was talking about the metrics we're judging all of this against, we are telling people who to go call or knock on a door, or maybe in the future, perhaps new tactics on organizing. But like we're guiding folks towards people based on a voter file that's been largely defined by modeling and these metrics that are a little dated. And so, one of the things like we're working on at my team at Good Influence is how can we take the signals we see when people interact with an influencer and then they take an action online that says, I care about this issue and I want to do something about it. We're matching some of those folks back to the voter file. And so in theory, you could be telling your organizers, hey, there's someone nearby and they hate Elon Musk. And according to the voter file, like they're not even a Democrat, but boy, do they hate Elon Musk. Like go have a conversation with that person. Don't be weird about it, but like we have an in here. And so I think just even thinking about digital and social media as like a place to gather those touch points versus just we modeled this potential voter in the voter file and that's why we're knocking this door. Like we just did a test last year on a state race in the Midwest. We found tons of people who, if you just looked at their data in the voter file, we would have never reached out to communicate with them or run advertising to them. But we had like strong data points that said like this person is fully with us, at least right now. And like that's where you can really sort of think about digital organizing coming together. It's just sort of connecting that ethereal down to the on the ground effort. So I think like at a high level, just taking this out of the organizers' problems and into the sort of infrastructure problems, we need to not be afraid of that. We need to not be afraid of new signal and noise informing the direction of our literal human bodies going out and representing our party or our ideas in those moments. And so I think just empowering organizers with new data points is a huge part of this. I think also thinking about, how we do persuasion. And similarly to field organizing, we lean very heavy into data. And if we don't know exactly who this person is, we're not even going to try to persuade them. And, you see just tons of people not being reached by our advertising because we're so specific in our targeting that it has to be matched to these things. And if we can't do this, then we can't verify it, and we can't validate it, and we can't publish an RCT proving the impact of it. That's also, frankly, insane. Like we need to just loosen up a little bit here and not be afraid to shout our message a little bit louder. The other side of the aisle shouts their message unapologetically to anyone who listens to it. I know what they're talking about on Fox News. I don't watch Fox News, but it ripples out to me because they don't over-target their message just to their people or people they think are receptive to it. They say it loud and proud. There's a similar version on digital that impacts our persuasion tactics, impacts our organizing tactics, so on and so forth. So I think they're like at the high level, it's that. And then having better platforms for our organizers to use that has this data. We've been using the same platforms, going back to the Obama era. It shows you the same things. There's not really a lot of ways to add in new data points. There's a lot of people working on changing this. There was an open call to try to sort of update some of these things that's going on right now. So I think it's less about the organizer being able to do digital organizing and more about the organizer being empowered to take new data points powered by digital tactics and apply them to their organizing. And then there's a whole bunch of tools you can do your organizing with that they should be using as well. Like a lot of the relational organizing work Greta's been doing, a lot of that, like you had to build technology to do it because it didn't exist. So I think it's just like there's some investments in tech and there's some like just getting the data down to the people.
To even carry on Josh's point a little bit there, like Democrats at large are scared of the internet and going on the internet and reaching voters on the internet, but we also boil that down into like the individual organizer experience. When I was an organizer in 2012, I was told not to go online. I was told never to post. And that was supposed to be the big digital election. And it's because, the Obama campaign was doing digital, but I, as an organizer on the Obama campaign, was not. And so then I went in 2014 and accidentally ended up in Kentucky and part of a digital department. And I was like learning how to organize people online and learning how to use Facebook to get people to show up to events. And I was like, this would have been really helpful when I was an organizer. And so in 2015 and 16 on the Hillary campaign, we spent 2 full years trying to even just get organizers to use the internet to organize, to post in a Facebook group, asking people to come to shifts, like to tell the story of what they were doing on Twitter. And it was like, embarrassing for all these like people who should have been digital natives, but we had so been trained to not even go on the internet that it was like so far behind us. And so the real reason I became an organizing director for Pete's campaign was part that I wanted to try all these new organizing strategies, but also I just wanted to show that you could give organizers tools like peer-to-peer texting so that they could just quickly text through their confirms for an event later that day and they wouldn't drastically mess it up. And that was so much the mentality of, still is the mentality of campaigns, is that if you let organizers who are paid staff that we train and spend a lot of time coaching, not as much as we need to anymore, but like if we cannot trust them to go on the internet and post on the internet and use tools that cost money, what are we doing? And that is such a indictment of like where we are at with our party, that we just don't trust our paid staff to be able to use, digital tools and tactics that all of us are native in. Be able to use email to be able to quickly reschedule people's shifts. Be able to use texting tools to be able to quickly, confirm everybody who's scheduled for a shift before the shift starts. Like these things are basic and we don't let organizers do them. And that was so much of what went wrong in 2024, is that they said, all right, we really want to integrate digital and let's hire a separate staffer to sit next to every organizer to do the digital part. And no wonder that didn't go well. That's unbelievably confusing and weird.
It's a couple of things. One of our organisers that I know listens to this show religiously, who was a field organiser in 2014, will be sitting here going, Stephen told us we weren't allowed to go on the internet either. It was one of our rules of the road that we did in the very first week of training. So to Ryan, okay, see, there can be growth. You're allowed to now, all right? Just calm down. My question to you though, Greta, is, not obviously, I'm assuming it can't be an add-on, because when we did start to say to our organisers in 2016 and 18 campaigns, we wanted them to start to even do basic things like just take photos or film stuff from your house meetings and your events where people are coming together, and then give it to us, and then we can publish it centrally. So that's still not, still being very risk adverse. When we were asking them to do that each week, they were like, oh, I've got to do that on top of everything else. Mm-hmm. And so we were like, well, we don't want to overburden the organisers with too much work because they've got enough on their plate already. So how would you approach that? As if you're a regional field director, or if you're a field director and you're working with your organisers, how do you, I don't want to use the word blend because that's what they tried to do in the Biden-Harris campaign, but how in the life of life of an organiser, how do you merge those tactics or those priorities of the week that they've got to do, so they're doing both traditional kind of work as well as then reaching out into the online spaces?
Yeah, great question. I think it's a mix of 3 things. Like, one, we need to loosen up organizer metrics so that they are not just focused on attempts every day. When your organizer metric is just how many doors you've tried to knock or how many phone calls you've tried to make, it tells you what you should be filling your time with, but it isn't geared towards like success or, this is how many conversations I had, or this is how many quality conversations I had, or how many leaders this led to. And so part of the reason organizers are so overburdened is that as contact rates have gone down, we just ask them to make more and more and more attempts. Loosening metrics and giving more organizers more time every day to be creative and try new things. Go to an event, I'm at Whole Foods right now, sit at a grocery store and talk to people as they're there. Like, there's so many things that organizers could be doing to embed in their communities that aren't just knocking doors and making phone calls. And so I think to your point about like, how do we not make this a burden to add on? Like, when the organizer is sitting at a Panera, why not post in the, local next door and say, hey, I'm the organizer for this campaign and I'm sitting at this Panera all day, come say hi. And so I think, one, it's loosening our metrics and trying to give metrics that are more geared towards success. Two, I think it's not trying to force organizers to do something they don't want to do. I'm not on TikTok and I'm not comfortable posting a TikTok. I'm 34 years old and I'm fine with that being behind me. But like, I am extremely well versed in my Instagram. And if nothing else, everybody in my life knows where I'm traveling and what campaign I'm working on because I'm posting a lot about my Instagram. And so just asking people to do things that are already native to the way that we are all digitally literate in our day-to-day lives. I mean, again, like, this isn't like I need to, we all need to get really good at Discord. This is like, we should leverage email when we organize and give organizers the data around who has donated to the campaign or who's even opted into the email list. Like, a lot of it is just uniting the data to allow organizers to do their jobs better, but not, saying, I also need you to be a content creator, but saying, if you're already kind of a content creator, go at it. We trust you. And then the third thing is like, and we did this really well on Pete's campaign, is just making it a fun culture. Instead of going to organizers and saying, we need you to, take content and take videos for us to post, we just started asking all of our organizers to communicate with us over Twitter, which sounds crazy, but we had a huge list of every organizer's Twitter handle, and I would spend 30 minutes a day overall, probably just interacting with our organizing staff on Twitter and just celebrating what they were doing. And all of a sudden there were other organizers commenting on it. And we were having this like big public discussion kind of, but also just a celebration of what we were all doing. It was so fun to watch organizers like, hosting, they called them like Buddha brunches and like doing, spending their weekends having pancakes with a bunch of people or, fishing with their volunteers. And like, they would take pictures of it because then it made the campaign look fun, but then also other people would immediately celebrate them online. And then all of these volunteers would find them and celebrate them online. And all of a sudden it became this like really joyful corner of the internet where we were crafting a narrative about how much fun we were having. But also I was building genuine relationships with my organizers that I wasn't seeing day to day as I was in South Bend. And so I think building all of this together, like it's so interesting because everybody is online and offline. We are having this conversation right now over a computer, but that doesn't make it a digital conversation. Like, it's only really campaigns that silo like online and offline. Everybody else is sort of a mix of both. Josh and I only see each other like once a year, but I don't feel like we do because we Signal, we Instagram about the NBA. Like, there's so many ways that we are all fluent in both right now. It's just campaigns that really try to like define the two worlds because we're not comfortable letting everybody into the world in a complete way.
Let's go into the metrics conversation here, because one of the things that we in Australia didn't do I guess what I'd call the Obama period of organising was we didn't measure things. And when I went over and saw that, and then we really brought that back into our work, it was a game changer for us because we could actually prove to folks who doubted the practice of organising that it could win elections and create change, that metrics were, whereas I used to give shit to all of the guys who were like press secs going, great job today, guys. How do you know you won any votes? Oh, I got a couple of media releases out. Oh, had a coffee with a journalist, Field constantly had to justify our existence in the world, and we could because we had metrics. And now I start to wind up digital guys as well going, oh, you put out a couple of posts. What have you done? Now, am I asking the wrong question by saying, should we, the experiences that Greta just talked about there, should we be measuring that? Should we be creating digital metrics that can measure an impact that it's having, not just shifting votes, but also bringing folks into our campaign as well, right? Because it's all about trying to build capacity and then go out and win votes. But do we need to, are we measuring it? And if not, is that okay?
I think Greta will also have a lot of thoughts on this, but I don't want to throw out every single thing we've ever done forever. Like, you want to be able to like show your impact and your value. I think, to something I think you asked earlier of just like what's changed, from previous to now. I think it's just, to me, I think you build the metrics based on what your plan is. And so like to Greta's point, like there's great examples of this going on right now. I just want to like be clear. Like, there are a lot of campaigns this cycle that either because of the candidate or the intentionality of the campaign, they might not be doing everything we're talking about, but they have a clear vision of the story they want to tell to voters. And when you see it playing out in their digital program, and by that I mean like social media and advertising, to their organizing, to their television, to their press secretaries saying the quotes, like, it's all clearly everyone knows their point of view and they can march it forward. And so if that's a place that you're starting from, and like, when we talk about President Obama, Mayor Pete, there's when you have candidates who have a clear point of view and like a personality people can like go to, like makes it a lot easier to do some of this stuff. But I think it still has to be the starting place for any race, right? Like if you are running against someone who's just awful, like that can be your thing too. It doesn't have to be a personality driven point. But I think the point I'm trying to make is you need to have a clear vision of where you want to go and then build the metrics for that versus saying, I am a field person, thus my metrics must be door knocks and phone calls. So I think I wouldn't ever say, because I love data, we shouldn't have metrics. I guess the thing that I would challenge everyone where you are, where we are, is the metrics should change and they should be highly variable to your project. So on things we're working on, where we're working with influencers and we're also driving hard actions from audiences, we've made custom metrics to show and explain that success. And it is like, if you broke it down, we're showing some CPMs and impression-based data, and then we combine that with a value towards actions, and we divide them and we blend them and we weight social media engagement a certain way, and we have certain bars and expectations. So if you're above a certain level of social media engagement and we saw 3 other things happen, that is sort of into a super metric. But we built that to define success for the thing that we now do, which didn't exist even 2 years ago in the same way. Like what we were doing in 2024 and what we're now doing in 2026, just in the influencer space of this, is totally different. And I think if you actually asked anyone doing field organizing or any other part of a campaign, is what you do now, like press secretary, is what you're doing now the same as what you did in 2014? Hell no. So how would you define success if you really took 10 minutes to think about it? Well, instead of sending out these press releases to 400 reporters who now no longer exist, I do this instead, and I do this thing, and my tweets get this interaction with reporters, and I know I impact the zeitgeist in these ways. We all need different metrics. And I think like if you start the campaign and you just dust off last time's metrics, you've already probably set yourself up for some failure or potential failure. I mean, all of these things that we do like have an impact at 1 to 5% variables, right, on impact. Like that's like if we impact, that's where you see the impacts of these things when it matters. Blowout's a blowout. So we need to always be adapting those things forward. So thanks for letting me ramble on that.
No, but I mean, that's an interesting point because you intentionally used the word impact there. And the report talks about how some of the metrics are a bit too narrow and focus on outputs over rather than impact. Maybe it's worthwhile defining what you mean by impact.
Greta, take a swing at this one.
I think I fully agree with Josh. And to translate this into like my side of the organizing is that right now we measure things like attempts because they're measurable. They give us big numbers, which we cannot have this conversation without, not acknowledging that Democrats love big numbers. If you ever read an article that says this campaign knocked 1 million doors last weekend, you know that nobody asked any follow-up questions about that. And then the third thing is that we are really good at measuring this one set of things that makes us feel like organizers are doing work, but we don't actually measure what wins elections. And so even on Pete's campaign, one of the things we measured was house meetings. And it was not because it was a winning strategy to have X number of house meetings, but because house meetings were a really good way for organizers to identify leaders that would then become caucus leaders who are going to host the house meeting. It was a great way to have them practice, all right, we need you to invite 50 of your friends and family to this thing. So they were able to build a network. And then it was a great way for us to get into a room with a bunch of people that were possible Pete supporters and directly make the case to them. It was like bringing them to us. Those are the kinds of metrics we need to start experimenting with, is metrics that actually facilitate organizing and actually facilitate election winning actions. And so to Josh's point about impact, we have gotten so far away from impact and what we measure and the goals we set around it. And so being able to restructure that from an organizing standpoint, again, the data is great, but I think we need to separate the data we're collecting and what we're doing. And again, I think a really good example is with relational, people should be talking to their friends and family. But if we collect the data of how every person is talking to their friends and family, and then we try to like optimize based on that, it's going to tell you that because I'm, talk to my 3 best friends mostly over a group chat, everyone should be contacted via group chat. Like there is a difference between we're over indexing and over learning so many things and then building metrics around them, fully losing the plot. We need to be building metrics that facilitate organizing.
We are going to, that's a good segue into relational organizing now, Greta, but I actually have one more question that I actually want to ask you and get your feedback on it maybe. One thing that we did do in 2018 was we were trying to make the life of an organizer far more efficient, as opposed to just, particularly in the volunteer recruitment phase of the campaign, not the persuasion phase of the campaign. So just organizing and trying to build our volunteer capacity before we then moved into going out and knocking on doors and trying to persuade folks to vote for the candidate. And so we were creating call lists for them to call through to recruit to either a one-on-one or a house meeting. And we measured those things. But one of the things we did look at was different types of call lists. Ones were like what we call digital hot leads, people who had signed up through some kind of online platform where they indicated that they wanted to get contacted by an organizer. And then we had like street stores, so like high vis, in the supermarkets, and people just signing pledge cards and whatnot. Membership lists, so members of the Labor Party. We have a different kind of culture in Australia. People are actively members of the Australian Labor Party as opposed to the Democratic Party. It's not the case as much, right? It's not a criticism, but just the way that our parties have been set up. So anyway, but some lists were better than others, and some lists were better for different organisers than others. And so we got our data team to actually track in Van, but in Campaign Central, that's what we call it here in Australia, which ones were more likely. So if you call through a digital hot lead, how many shifts did you get to either a one-on-one or a house meeting? And so we actually started to build like a batting average, a bit like, if you're like, fastball down the middle, that's your pitch. That's the one you want to swing at, right? Stay away from stuff, deep at low and inside, right? You don't want that ball, right? And so we were sort of saying, focus on, you do really well with the branch members. They must love you, right? Whatever you're doing in those phone calls, you're recruiting heaps of people to one-on-ones and also the digital hot leads. But this other list, like a supporter score that's been modeled, do that one last, right? So that the organizer can then prioritize what they wanted to call. I mean, is that heading the right direction of what you want to do? Because I thought that was what was happening in the States anyway. I just didn't think that was new or rocket science that we'd come up with.
No, I love that. I mean, I think about it so much like, if campaigns were run like a business, we would be so far behind everyone else. Like if you had a salesperson calling through people all day, every day with a 3% contact rate, that salesperson would immediately be asked, like, what are you doing? Like, what? This is insane. This is such a waste of time. But with organizers, we don't just ask them to do that. We mandate it. We say every day, regardless of the other work you're doing, you have to make this many phone calls, regardless of contact rate. And it's probably better for you to go to events in the evenings, so then make your calls earlier in the day, even though your contact rate will be higher at night. Like we actively undo any innovation and make things worse for our organizers. It was really fascinating to go back to the Pete example of like, when we all of a sudden were pressured to introduce doors into our program, a lot of our strongest organizers kept doing the other work anyway and reported up to us that the doors goal was actually impeding the other work that they needed to do. So I think I love the idea of just, again, this is like the difference between like data for the sake of learning what's working and what's working when and adjusting on a really localized, like in organizer by organizer basis. The difference between data around how to optimize what an organizer's day looks like or how they're spending their time versus mandating it because we don't trust them to be able to think critically and setting goals around them trying to do work, regardless if that work wins the election. Like that's where we're at right now. And I think that's one of the biggest, shifts from where we used to be is that no one in Democratic politics, and I've asked this question a lot, has given me an answer for why we have mandatory phone goals for organizers on a daily basis beyond the fact that we don't trust them not to do work. And I think that's exactly where we're at right now.
Yeah. The other thing that, Stephen, you were just describing, like, I do think like I can't believe I feel like I'm dating myself by saying this, but if you just put on your history hat for a second and talk about like different types of races and when did they really start doing different types of work on the campaign? Like this just in 2024, there was a lot of different stuff going on, and a lot of things started relatively late in our election cycle, and then we had a candidate switch. So lots of things were going on, and that like make it harder to like have this intentionality on certain pieces. I think, but if you look at when we have a wide open primary, you start campaigns earlier and you start them scrappier. And so what you need to get out of every person that you're putting on payroll, or what you assume you can get out of a volunteer, is heightened. And then as you go on, you have more time to like perfect and adjust. Similarly, Obama 2012 that I worked on, like I was hired as the digital director in Pennsylvania over a year and a half, basically, before the election. I was on the ground in the state. There was no one I needed to go drag to a polling place for quite a while. And what I did was travel the state with our field director. I knew every regional field director. I spent time. I knew volunteers in every part of the state I was in. And like, I knew them a year ahead of time. And so if I needed to do something 6 months later, 9 months later, 12 months later, I knew who to call in every single part of it, and they knew what I needed, and I knew what they were working on. So lead time and intentionality on bringing it in. One of the things that we talked about when we were putting this together, I mean, this was like one of the first conversations I remember, was who do we need to get this in front of, and when do we need to make sure that they're thinking about this, and to like really make the structural changes to make sure this plays out. Like, this needs to be in the discussion for the person who's putting together the original budget for the campaign. Like, the operations director is as important to making sure this happens as anything else, because if they budget a bunch of organizers for a very specific execution, then the whole thing's set up for that. And so if you aren't getting into every campaign manager who's going to be leading a presidential campaign, heading into 27 and 28 right now, and saying, please think about this differently and make sure and advocate to set this up as far back as you can. Because if you don't have the resources allocated early, you can't train your whole organizing team to think and to communicate differently. You can't have the time to take your data team, who is also very trained on evaluating these metrics, and they report those up to a lot of other people who use that data to help also think about what they should do on the polling side and all these other places. All of this is structural as much as anything else. And so what you described in your team doing, you had structurally set it up to think that through. And I think one of the things that's tough now is like, one of the other things that got rinsed and repeated a bunch was literally the budget informing who does what and the roles and the understanding. So we have folks in data who all they do is crunch call data. That's not necessarily the best use of their very smart minds either, but it's how we allocated the budget. And I think we need to, it's not just like organizers do better, change your life, embrace relational on high. It is all the way back when the party, the state parties, their regional desks, the people advising them, outside funders who are helping get these campaigns off the ground, the outside money that goes into labor organizing and all these other pieces, they all need to think about allocating resources differently. My God, like the candidates have to want to do this and understand that it matters, because they'll lose if they're just invested. Like, if you put all this energy out to raise all this money, and then you just pour it back into the failing tactics because it's just how it was written into the budget, you've already failed and you're going to fail. But I don't think I think we're like talking to people in every walk of the campaign ecosystem about this for a reason. It's like, you might not actually directly do any of this work, but the decision you make at the beginning impacts everyone else's roles as you go on. And so like, this is it when we say it's structural, it's not trying to like dump it on the people who executed the work. Those people, a lot of them didn't have a say. They just showed up and did the role that they were hired into with a job title that was budgeted a long time before. And once that ball's rolling, it's very hard to reroute. So I think a lot of this, it's the intentionality that you described, we're preventing just because we set the whole thing up differently. It's all been copied too many times. It gets a little blurrier each time.
There's a little bit of simultaneous history happening here, though, because, in 2014 and in 2018 here in Victoria, in Australia, we hired organisers. We started the hiring process 12 months out from the election and were hired. So our elections here are also in November on a fixed date, but they started basically in the first week of February. So they had all of that time to organise all the way through. And even then I was getting pushback on hiring so early, right? And having to explain, folks need to learn how to do this job. We've got to train them, we've got to build relationships, and then they've got to get into their communities and do all this organising and whatnot.
Yeah. One of the most impactful groups in our world is Emily's List, which supports amazing female candidates all up and down the ballot. Emily is not a person. Emily's stands for early money is like yeast; it rises. The same thing's true on every other part of a campaign, and I think we forget that. The number of things that were late in 24, not just at the presidential, but across it, like just donors weren't getting off it. They didn't see this urgency. It impacted everything just from a funding perspective. We know it's going to be different. It's already different for this cycle in 2026. Like there's so much energy. There's so much happening like that. I'm actually very excited about. Like you just feel, I had candidates reaching out to us for a race this November, last January. That's a very different way of thinking about the world 2 years out. And as we head into the next presidential, we know that there's going to be that energy and that enthusiasm, and those dollars are showing up faster. But then it's back on us to make sure that we then structure that. Yeah, knock on wood, please donate and support us. But those things have to all then be utilized in a more efficient way too.
And the mistake that we're making now is that we are certainly, from an organising standpoint, hiring organisers and putting them in later and later and later. And it was such a contrast. The 2022 campaign, the output was so much smaller. And I know we talked before about outputs, but we were lucky for other reasons I'm not going to go through with you guys on the show right now. But I'm worried that the next time around, what's happening is that there's an attitude in some parts of the party in which we just hire organisers late, we'll partner them up with a candidate, and we'll just get the candidate and 3 or 4 volunteers, and they'll knock all the doors, and that will be the field program. So none of the other stuff that we're talking about, and I'm concerned, basically. Let's talk. Let's be solutions oriented, kind of focused people. The relational organising stuff. I know that it gets used a lot. Greta, first of all, can you just dispel the myth and actually define what we mean by relational organising and what that actually looks like?
Yes. I will say that I've said this so many times to so many people that now in my dreams, I'll be dreaming and saying it. So just know that about the last 10 years of my career. Relational organising is truly just the idea, the simple proven concept that people talking to their own friends and family is more impactful than strangers talking to strangers. It's, become more and more so, we've got a really fragmented media environment. Right now, certainly here, things are so polarized that we're at the point where now it takes so much for a message to break through, to the point where the message has become less important or as important as the messenger. So the messenger has become really critical. This is the way for everything. I always say that campaigns are like the last door-to-door salespeople. No one else is going door-to-door to sell anything anymore. Everyone is leveraging like social pressure, micro-influencers, like certainly online influencers, but even knowing that if you give me a code for my Instagram, I'm going to get 16 people I know to be able to buy something. Like everyone is leveraging this except campaigns. I'll also just say a lot of people say, isn't that just organizing? Yes, totally. The reason why we call it relational is only to differentiate it from strangers knocking doors and strangers making phone calls. We also call it warm outreach versus cold outreach. And also at this point, it doesn't have to be you just talking to your dad and your best friend. Like I have more of a relationship with somebody that I went to high school with than a total stranger. So it's even figuring out how to reach people through the warmest possible connection that we have with them.
So that takes time. And I mean, we literally just talked about time and needing to put organisers in the field early and to get to scale to the point where these conversations are having an impact on either turning out folks to vote for the Democratic candidate or indeed persuading people that might be soft and coming to our way of thinking. That takes time. Talk us through how you get to scale and what kind of scale are we talking about here?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's essentially two ways to scale, and that's how we've broken out two kinds of relational programs. So I'll start with the one we'll probably talk a lot less about because I think it's for a long time going to be very US specific. But we've started these paid relational organizing programs, which specifically recruit really, really low turnout voters. So people who maybe have never voted, recruit them into a program and pay them money to talk to their friends and family about the election. We provide them a full civic literacy education. We talk to them about the genuine stakes of the election to try to get them like earnestly very interested and understand like, oh, this is what's at stake here, so that they are really good messengers when they go into their networks. And we do that because they are likely to know other low propensity voters. So those kinds of programs achieve really fast scale. Typically, they're run over the course of like a month at the end of an election. But this is what I did in 2024, was run a paid relational program. And we had, in the final month of the election, we started the program and we ran it for about maybe 5 weeks. And we had 35,000 people in battleground states talk to 1.2 million of their friends and family. So these programs are completely scalable. The volunteer programs where you're not paying people, the way to scale them is time. You're exactly right. Like putting people on the ground early and training people long-term to talk to their friends and family. People know people, again, it's not just talking to the 5 people you know best in the world. It's talking to anybody you know. So that'll vary. People on average know about 30 people. I probably can have a good conversation with 200 people. I'm a big extrovert and I know a lot of people. And so there's like varying degrees to be able to scale it. There's also varying ways to use relational. It's not just like a turnout strategy or just a persuasion strategy. Like it's also great for quickly getting a bunch of people to contribute $3 to your campaign when you launch, or asking people to attend events if you've got a bus tour that's traveling through a state. There's so many ways to be able to use relational. I always, people always ask about scale, but it's easier to scale relational than it is to scale a door knocking operation. Relational organizing is essentially a mid-level marketing scheme. Like it's asking people to then ask people to ask people to build a huge pyramid of people talking to their friends and family. I think it's far easier to scale that than it is anything else. The two things to be really aware of with relational programs are who are you reaching? Because if you're only asking your like highest volunteers to do it, they're just going to know other people who are likely volunteers. So you have to really make sure you're asking everyone and going into specific communities and engaging those communities to get them to talk to their friends and family. So it's about who's doing it. And then it's about how much emphasis you place on it as a campaign. So like in Iowa for the Iowa caucus, we reached as many people through relational as we ever reached through cold contact. And it's because we emphasized it every single event, every single volunteer. We did so many, sit down and have everybody map their network. We did a huge thing where we needed a precinct captain in every precinct across Iowa. And the first thing we did was ask all of our volunteers, who do you know who lives here? And it was like, well, my best friend's cousin lives there, but I don't know if they like Pete. It was like, doesn't matter. He's our precinct captain. Like there's, all of our metrics are based on who is moved by a door knock or a phone call. Relational blows all that out of the water because if I texted my best friends to do something right now, they wouldn't hesitate. They would just do it because I'm the one asking.
How much does this differ from the Snowflake distributed leadership model, the NTL?
Yeah. Well, I'll just caveat that my version of the neighborhood team leader Snowflake model was the 2012 version, and my whole focus was knocking doors and making phone calls. So I'm not even convinced I got the right version of this.
Yeah. Okay.
But essentially, from my understanding, it was that you would recruit leadership who would be like a phone bank captain, a Canvas captain, a data captain, and then they would manage the other people who are volunteering for data or volunteering for canvassing. This is much more about like, instead of making the first ask that we make of volunteers a high bar ask, like take 3 hours on a Saturday and go knock 50 doors of people you don't know, lowering the bar to saying, you're a supporter. Who are 6 people that you're going to talk to this week about it? Or, hey, we have the voter reg deadline is next week. Can you just really quickly with me right now, let's go through the voter file and make sure 15 people you know are registered to vote. I found out my best friend was kicked off the voter rolls in DC because I was randomly stalking her to see her previous vote history, and she wasn't even in the voter rolls. So I think there's like, it's much more about lowering the bar of who we're asking to participate in a campaign and the intensity that we're asking them to contribute. But what I think is so beautiful about that is once somebody has talked to 2 people about a campaign, then they're willing to talk to 5 people, and then they understand how the campaign strategy works. And then all of a sudden they're talking to people that they wouldn't normally have a political conversation with. And the next thing you know that they're like, all right, I'll volunteer at the farmer's market booth. And then they're knocking doors, and then they're a volunteer leader. Like it's such an easier first step on this like ladder of engagement that we love to talk about. But it's such an easier way to be able to immediately engage somebody. The best part too is that people can have repeated conversations, and they will have conversations with people that fall outside your traditional universes. So on Pete's campaign, we were talking to people who had not been contacted by a Democrat or Republican campaign ever, but were like, all right, nobody's ever asked me to vote for a Democrat. I'll listen to you. And it's just because somebody they knew was talking to them. And so, my best friends will not ever pick up the phone when they call, but I'll call them every single day if I want them to vote, and they will still pick up even though they're getting harassed. Like, there's so many benefits to layering relational onto a campaign program. This is also not to say we should never knock another door, but what's so smart is we should reach the people we can through a trusted messenger, and then that will allow us to be more efficient with how we target our cold outreach. Like, if no campaign in Colorado should ever knock my parents' door again. It'll freak my parents out at best. I know that I will get my parents to vote every single election cycle. Like, I am a better messenger for the Democratic Party than anyone who could show up on my parents' doorstep. I am saving the Colorado Democratic Party time and effort. And it would be great for me to be able to communicate to the Colorado Democratic Party that I'm doing that work. That's what we need to be scaling.
With the Meg Pete campaign and the successes that you talked about in the Iowa caucus, how early did the organisers were they put into the field for this sort of this relational organising strategy to really sort of take hold?
Yeah, well, one, I'll give the huge caveat that a primary is so different than a general, and a competitive primary. Democrats are willing to do anything to win a competitive primary. They're willing to innovate. They're willing to spend money. It's so different than a general election. And I think it's just because if the stakes of losing are you lose to another Democrat, we're willing to innovate. So I started, the Iowa caucus was February 3rd, I want to say. And I had organizers on the ground starting in July. But we were started fairly late. Like, the first, Elizabeth Warren organizers, I think, hit the ground like April, May. We started fairly late because Pete didn't take off until all of a sudden it was like 0 to, we're a campaign that needs to have staff on the ground.
Okay. You touched on a couple of things there as well, which I think are cultural. And I kind of want to finish off the pod with maybe some questions around embracing change, embracing new ideas, the role of training places in that. Maybe I'll go to you first, Josh. What are the existing cultural barriers within the Democratic Party that doesn't want to embrace new ideas? And this can be across the board. This can be in data. This can be in digital. This can be in field. I just want to get a sense of what's holding folks back.
I mean, I think there's a couple of things. Greta actually touched on one that I think is really important for people to understand. It's just like the world has changed, at least for us. I mean, when you were talking about the success rates on doors over there, I was like, oh man, that sounds amazing. Sounds lovely. I'd love to go back to this world. I'll come help on the next election just so I can experience this. Count me in. But for us, if you look at every piece of data, everyone here will nod when you say nobody trusts institutions, and it's not a left or a right issue. And when we say institutions, people don't like brands, people don't like government. It applies to any institution, and it applies to campaigns. It applies to unions. It applies to just any faceless thing. And so we do a lot of pushing our partners to say, this is too polished. No one's going to buy it, because if it's this polished, people's bullshit radar and detector goes off, and then they turn their ears off and they don't want to listen. And so understanding you need a trusted messenger or trusted validator in your content, and that could be on the advertising side, which is a regular person that isn't overly produced, to how you're doing your organizing. That's a significant change from how we approached elections. I mean, talk about 2012, 2016, 2020, we had a pandemic, and we sort of understood some of this, and we did things differently because we had to. We were trapped in our houses. So I think that's a huge one. And then I think the other thing is just I always talk to people about why do you write a press release? What is in a press release? And the answer is it's 3 data points and 2 quotes. And it's all right, how else could you share 3 data points and 2 quotes? There's many other ways. And if you just stop and think about what you're writing, you realize there's other ways you could present that information. And so I think those challenges of just how are you telling your story, both in the presentation and the presenter, and then how are you distributing it, are two just sort of ongoing challenges that I think, again, the rinse and repeat of I'm starting my next election. Let me dust off the last playbook. You're already deferring to things that are out of date, and we're just moving so much faster now. There's a lot of conversations in our world too about like the uses of AI, and I think we see it as a boogeyman sometimes when it's like it can just speed up some of what you're doing, and like there's a big policy fight we should have, but the tools exist, and if you don't use them, your opponent will. I think just lowering the risk aversion to testing and trial and error, and realizing that when I worked for a member of Congress, and in the past lives, you'd workshop every word in your tweet. Elon Musk tweets 600 times a day. Your one tweet does not matter. Just keep moving. This stuff moves faster than it ever has before. So all of those things should mean it's okay to innovate. It's okay to test. It's okay to just say, we don't have a perfect metric. We might not be able to track this exactly, but let's just see how it goes, lean into the art of it. I think those are big parts of this. And then, I think for me, the big takeaway of this report, it's 60 plus pages. It took a lot of people a lot of time. Comparatively, like Greta and many other people put in a lot of hours doing a lot of interviews. The takeaway is a lot of people did the thing that they were asked to do. They knew it didn't work. They did not enjoy doing it. The people on the receiving end of it didn't enjoy it at all either. Like that 3% response rate means that 97% were still had to hear their phone ring or ignore a knock on their door. That's a terrible brand experience. We should understand both sides of that equation. The people we are reaching out to are not enjoying this either. And so if our staff aren't enjoying it and the voters and the donors aren't enjoying any part of it either, to Greta's point, if this was a company, this would be a very bankrupt company if we just kept doing the same things. And when you realize you're bankrupt or you're about to be broke, you don't just run it back. So lean into shaking it up. Figure out the metric later. These are all things I think we're just begging people to just be okay being okay with. And it starts at the top, it trickles down to the bottom. And for those who make money as vendors servicing this stuff, you'll still make money somehow. So calm down and stop being a pain in the ass in executing this and making it happen. We know people there's a mail industry that sends mail. There's phone industries that help make phone calls. Everyone will still have money to be made and whatever. This is an industry too. We understand that, but we just elected a demented, old deranged man who's just throwing bombs at people. And so I'm pretty sure no one's enjoying that experience. It costs way too much to buy gas. We've seen what happens when we just run it back. For the love of God, I don't think we can do that too many more times before there's just not democracy over here. I guess is sort of my ramble to this.
It's interesting, because I've always spoken about the how the US left or the Democratic Party have such a strong tradition of embracing innovation, and I've always said to folks back home, think about the experiences that came out of the 2004 Kerry campaign, and that brought on the Analyst Institute, that kind of stuff, right? Greta, where's that gone? What's happening? From an organizing side.
Yeah. My personal opinion is that I think we have some people in charge who are insistent on running things the way that they've been run before and who are uninterested in creating room for new things. I loved my experience on the Obama campaign. I think there's a lot of people we should be looking at who are in leadership in 2024 and why they did the same things that we were doing in 2008 and 2012. We as a party are reckoning with the idea that a lot of people we have in power maybe shouldn't be in power anymore. I think we probably need to do that internally as well. Mm-hmm. I also think, to Josh's point, there's a lot of people who make money on the way that we do things right now. And a lot of people who, will still get funding to do those same things regardless of efficacy. But I also think the way I find optimism is, now more than ever, I have seen our party having the conversation that this doesn't work. the campaigns I'm talking to are all kind of going rogue. And we've always had organizers who are willing to go rogue and do their own thing and who are like, yeah, I'm not going to do this. Like there was a beautiful article in the New York Times about, I think it was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Dunkin', and it was like a rogue staging location run out of a Dunkin', and they did all this innovative stuff. Like that is always going to exist. We just need to actually start turning those into best practices and not stop trying to force organizers to hide them from us. I think we're already seeing that this cycle. I also think the thing that makes me really optimistic is that presidential primaries are when we do our most innovation, and we've got one of those next year. So ideally, if we still have elections next year, I think there will be a lot of innovation. And we were so close last time. We were one Iowa caucus away from being able to turn this into the way that Democrats do things. The people who are in power were in power because they were trained by the 2008 and 2012 winning campaign. We haven't done anything different. There's, new candidates, but same people in charge. If we can have a totally new kind of organizing model emerge into the 2027 and 2028, that'll be what all of a sudden our entire new class of organizers is trained on and what our volunteers come to know. And if we can build real infrastructure with that, instead of, hoping that people keep knocking doors and making phone calls after we leave. But what if we build a national social graph of millions of voters all in one go, people who know each other, paid relational program, volunteer relational program, tons of relationships mapped, hundreds of thousands of supporters trained to talk to their friends and family. We're not doing that right now. It would be amazing if Democratic campaigns right now were just focusing on having supporters tell their friends and family that Trump is the reason gas prices are so high. We're not doing that. We're hiring staff to start knocking doors. If we can build a national social graph that then exists past the election, we are going to be in such a better position of power to be able to constantly communicate with voters through people they trust about, legislative wins, about things that Democrats are doing, something we definitely didn't do under Biden, about special elections, about local elections. There's so much that we can do with that, but we just need somebody to actually go run an innovative program at a presidential scale that retrains everybody and builds better data for us to actually leverage for future elections.
Sounds like you, Greta.
I mean, look, I'm ready.
We could talk about this for hours, and maybe we might have to get you back on the show again to have a bit of another yak. But just listening to, and I want to end here on that high note as opposed to a shit sandwich. But in my own journey of this practice of organising and developing leadership, the three things that was always taught to me was organising. Obviously should reach a strategic goal that you're trying to work towards. 2, grow the capacity of the people you're organising. And 3, develop the individual leadership and facilitate that work. And that's what makes it sustainable and beyond just an election campaign. And in the end, it's our democracy that's at stake, isn't it? And, often we take for granted and we think, our democracy is fine. But if one thing we've learned over the last 2 years or maybe a little bit longer in the United States is that your democracy actually is under threat. And I keep on trying to reiterate that to folks here in Australia, is that don't take for granted the fact that we have compulsory elections and people have to vote and a democracy is fine. It's getting fragmented. And all of a sudden we can find ourselves in situations where we're like, shit, people can't go and vote now, or, and organising. People are going, what's the solution? Well, one of them is organising, and we need to organise our people. Josh, Greta, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the writing, and to your colleagues as well for writing that report. I think we'll put a link to it on our show notes for other organisers to go read. You should go read that report. It's only 60-odd pages. It's an easy read, something you can do over a coffee on a Saturday morning, and lots to learn. And there's a positivity to it as well. It's not just this is what's wrong with the Democratic Party. It's also here's how we can change it. And I'm incredibly grateful for the work that you've done. Lots of lessons for us in Australia. So thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having us. This has been fun.
I loved this.
Hey, Social Democrats. Thanks for listening. Today's episode was hosted by myself, Stephen Donnelly, and produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like the show, then join our Patreon community for early and ad-free access to each episode. We regularly take questions and comments from our Patreon members, so get in there if you want to have your say. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.